Welcome, I'm the Deadwood Jedi. This is going to be another Raid Shadow Legends video. Today, we're going to continue the Faction Wars series by looking at the Orcs faction. This is absolutely one of the hardest factions to do. And part of the reason why is that just the champions available aren't... You know what? Let me rephrase that. It used to be one of the hardest factions to do. Currently, it's still pretty difficult, but maybe not as crazy as it used to be because there are a lot more options as far as champions and approaches to bring to it than there used to be, as we've added more champions. So all the factions, honestly, it's still pretty difficult. There's not a lot of revivers available. There's not a ton of healers available, though the ones that are available seem to be really, really good. So there are definitely some options here for you, but it's going to be a little tricky without certain key champions, or especially using some certain key champions. So I'm going to go over all of that. There aren't a ton of legendaries as well in this faction that are particularly great, though they have gotten better as they've been reworked over time. So there are some things you're going to want to look out for. I've actually struggled with this a fair amount when I use my legendary champions. In this, obviously, we're going to stay away from that, using only epics and rares. Now, in this, I don't have any blessings. I think I might have one on the one rare champion I'm going to be bringing in, but that's not going to be a significant difference in this. So just be aware with all these videos, even when I have blessings, I definitely don't pick any blessings for them to use for this. And if I do leave it on, it's usually just something like Phantom Touch, which isn't a big difference maker in the end thing. Now, this is a little bit harder. There aren't as many champions. I'm actually doing this one on my main account, not the test server. So I'm going to be using my gear. It means it's probably going to be a little bit above what you're used to, but just think about this. If I can do this with these champions, you can bring in your legendaries. You can always swap your best gear on your champions if you need to, but it's definitely something that's going to be attainable. This isn't the toughest of the factions out there, but it is definitely on the higher end of it. Usually one of the last ones people get done. So anyway, let's look at the bosses, what their mechanics are, so we know what we're looking at. We'll look at some champions that we want to approach with this, and then we'll jump into the run here. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one that comes out. If you enjoyed today's music, we have that link to the SoundStripe down below in the pinned comment and description of this video, and you can use my code DeadwoodJedi and save 15%. And of course, if you want account work, help with your dungeon teams, clan boss, etc., my team is more than ready to go for you. All you got to do is visit my website, DeadwoodJedi.com. Okay, let's go ahead and start off. Stage 7, the boss here, it's the Disruptor. This one is generally not easy, but not difficult, right? You got Provoke on the A1, you've got True Fear on the A2, and you have Freeze as a passive ability. It just means really there's a lot of passive CC control going on here. That's not a horrible thing to be able to take care of. You know, basically just take care of the minions, get those out of the way first, and then you're probably going to want some kind of cleanse. Now, cleanse is really not even available in this faction. There's no cleanse. There's no block debuff to the best of my knowledge. So that is one of the things that actually makes this a little harder than usual. Building resistance will help, but at stage 7, pretty much just be tough enough to take some of the hits, bring in some healing so you can get yourself back to where you want to be, and then you should be in pretty good shape taking it down. Generally, stage 7, all you need is a few champions at level 60, and you can beat it. Then we have stage 14, the Protector. This one's a little bit tougher, right? AoE on the A1 with a fear debuff. The A2 is a revive, right? When puts himself to sleep, revives his allies, and then A3 is an ally attack ability, placing block damage on himself. So if we don't want it, the block damage is an issue, you can always bring in block buffs or some kind of buff steal ability. Either of those can work really good. You want to avoid the minions, just going to revive them. So there's really no point even taking them down. It's just waste your time. The best way to do it is just focus your attacks on the boss himself and knock him down as quick as you can. So obviously a little bit harder maybe in this faction than others, but if you can bring in a little bit of healing, a little bit of protection, you should be able to take it out without too much issue. And then very last is probably the hardest boss that's available, the Mirrorer. At least it's up there in the difficulty of the bosses for stage 21. And this one can be a little bit tricky. The biggest thing, the A1 AoE with a chance of placing fear, it's not that crazy. Though that fear does increase with every buff on your champion. So if you bring a lot of buffs, expect a lot of fears. That's one of the issues with this boss. The A2 ability is one of the harder abilities to deal with, where he steals all your buffs and gives you all of his debuffs. That obviously can be a problem. And the big thing to beating this boss is timing your skills. Do it so that you have less buffs when he's about to use that ability, and don't put your debuffs on him until after he uses that ability. If you can time stuff out that way, it'll make things a lot easier. You can definitely beat it without worrying about that. You can beat this on auto for sure, but it definitely makes it easier, if especially your first time through, by timing those skills out. And this obviously can get a little tricky if you bring in champions like Seer, for example. This can be one of those things where you actually use her abilities kind of counteract that. Bringing in people that can strip buffs is definitely a viable alternative to this. So some things kind of keep in mind here. And then of course the A3, this is the one that always screws people over, is the HP exchange ability. So there's obviously a couple things that we have to do with this boss in particular. That HP exchange can be very problematic. You know, one option is just build somebody really low HP so he exchanges with them. That's kind of hard to do, right? Not low HP, but low HP level, like don't heal them. I don't recommend that because then they die. But one of the things that you're really probably going to have to do is just make sure you bring in enough damage to really beat this boss down. And that's hard. That's actually really tricky to be able to do, especially if you're struggling with this already. So making sure that you have at least one, if not two, significant damage dealers will go a long way towards beating this boss, because that's kind of the idea. You knock out the minions, and then you just beat the boss down till he can't recover, till he exchanges, and then you just beat him down again. Makes the fights very long and annoying, not particularly more difficult. The A2 that I always find to be the big struggle point, the A3 just makes it where you have to be on your game for a little bit longer than usual. But I definitely want to take a look at the champs and find some people that would be good for us to use here. But let's understand what we're going against, right? The waves themselves are actually pretty easy. There's a Paragon on the second wave, so you want to make sure that you try to take him out first so you don't get stuck in an unkillable cycle where you just can't kill him, or bring in some, buff strip, that kind of thing. But other than that, it's not super dangerous, right? You should be able to get through it. Obviously, if you're struggling, bring in more CC, use your stun sets, bring your sleep sets, your provoke sets, whatever it is, or champions that can bring those things to the table. But otherwise, it should be pretty straightforward how to go about doing this. The hard part with this one is there's not a ton of healing, not a ton of revive available in this faction, and that makes it a little bit more difficult. There's also not a ton of protection, so like things like ally protection is not going to be there. There are, however, a fair amount of HP-based champions, and that can be a big benefit when trying to do this. So I'm going to show you kind of how I went about it. Now, one thing I should point out, Artak here, Artak is obviously a legendary that most people in the game have at this point. And he's going to be amazing for this, right? Not only does he bring a lot of damage, right? Brings HP burn for passive damage, decrease attack to make it so you're not getting hit as hard. And obviously the HP burn stuff and his passive ability are kind of interesting as well. So obviously that's a solid champion to bring in. Most of the legendaries will be good for this, but it's not the strongest roster of legendaries in this game. And that always can make it a little bit of a trickier thing. That said, we're not even going to use any. So there's obviously other options. Now, for my team, I think we're going to be bringing in Zargala. We're going to bring Torture Helm. We're going to bring in a few odds and ends, right? I'm using, was it Trumbor here? I want to say that I'm bringing in, as well as Vrask. And then we're going to have the one rare that is worth building in this faction. That's going to be Gaelic. Now, I know there's some clamor for Ironclad, and definitely can be used in certain ways, right? He does an extra attack, basically. He does have, he's got some okay stuff, I guess. But I'm not a big Ironclad fan. I don't think that's really worth doing. So I'm going to bring in Gaelic, just so we have a rare champion in here. He's actually pretty good for this, especially with the waves and the minions. He has like a, increased speed for himself. He has an AoE decreased defense. So there's definitely some stuff. I think I have him in a stun set, which is kind of nice with his AoE skills. But, again, the waves aren't hard. The hard part is that boss. We got those buff exchange abilities. We have the HP exchange abilities. And both of those can kind of trigger some wipe scenarios where we're not expecting it, or at least some kill scenarios. So I've found, while you can build your champions just all kind of tough with some healing abilities, I definitely find having a reviver is a really nice safety net. So for us, we're actually going to use, I think it's Trumbor here. Is it Trumbor? No, we're not using Trumbor. He's one of the few ally protection champions. He would be great for this, by the way. Ally protection, increased defense. Love that stuff. But you do have to be really careful about ally protection against the boss. If he steals it, you're going to end up just killing your own guy. So definitely something to be very, very careful about. So that's definitely, but he has a cleanse, and that's definitely good, right? But we can leech. Those are some nice things. There is, who am I bringing in? I have like, oh, Tagor. That's who I'm bringing in, Tagor. I actually really like him. I'd never used him before, built him for this, and I was like, really good for it, right? Got a revive, AoE revive, which is great, with a very nice size shield. So that's awesome. He's got an increased speed buff as well as a heal on his A2. His A1 with an increased defense. It's not a huge thing, right? That's not really the thing. It's the other two abilities that are really nice. But also this passive to decrease damage when they have 50% HP or less is really, really solid. So somebody like Trumbor is definitely someone I would bring in. Jorg is a very common. He's one of the only other revivers in this faction. So he's definitely somebody else I would be looking at. And he definitely brings some good stuff to the table. So either of those are really good options. Now I'm bringing in Vrask. He's also one of the best healers in this faction. He's one of the best healers in the game, period, as he has a passive that just increases your damage when he crits. So as long as you build him with 100% crit rate, really good champion to have. And he provides a lot of consistent healing for you guys. So high HP, high speed, 100% crit rate. If you can do that, he's awesome for you. Not particularly great outside of those things. Like that's all he does, but he's really good at that. I think without him, it becomes a lot harder, right? I think you can get away with other things like having Tagor. You can always build your champions in things like Guardian gear or Immortal gear, regen, things like, or even bolster stuff to help make sure that they keep their HP levels up. But you know, definitely I think Vrask, if you have him, is a no-brainer to bring in. Shaman is terrible, but does have that revive that can come in a pinch. Sandlash Survivor is an amazing champion, but again, you got to be careful about the passive ability. She has an unkillable that pops up, an ally protection that pops up. If that procs at the wrong time and it gets stolen, it can be really bad news for you. So not somebody I recommend bringing in if you can avoid it. But there's plenty of other really good champions, right? We talk about we always need decreased defense, right, to help get through the waves. Because the waves are easier, not as essential. Really, the only option for that would be Zargala, who's amazing, and I'm bringing in here. But somebody like Bonekeeper could be really good because, again, we don't have to worry as much about the waves. It's really just the boss that we care about. Even a Bloodfeather, I think, has a decreased defense. That can work, right? Single target. We're just worried about the boss. We're not worried about speed. Those are definitely options. Dux is another one. Though the one thing I would take off, I would disable the A3 when you go against the boss. You don't want that unkillable or the reflect damage stolen from you, right? But otherwise, amazing. Decreased defense, decreased attack, decreased accuracy, all really good abilities to bring in here. And so there's obviously a variety of champions that you can choose from. Now, I was always using Seer because she was my best built champion at the time I tried to take this down. And obviously she's great, but she strips your buffs. You will strip the enemy buffs too if you give her enough accuracy. That can actually be a really nice bonus for you. Mine's always a little bit squished though, so that's always the other half of that coin, is her being squishy. So again, you want to bring in some damage here where you can find it. It's going to be in your epics, right? I'm actually bringing in Torture Helm, who can hit pretty hard. It has some buff stealing abilities on that A1. Emergency revive if he dies, right? So like that's just kind of a whatever champion I'm bringing in. Zargala, I have again Tagor for some healing, Vrask for some healing, and then we have Zargala for the AoE decreased defense, and then Gaelic. Now, again, I can probably get away with using a Bonekeeper. A Two-Hawk, I think, would be great, right? AoE decreased speed is a really nice ability, especially against the boss. Increased speed, again, is really good. But, you know, and a stun, right? Lot to like about somebody like Two-Hawk, I would definitely look at. But you're definitely going to need someone to, you know, weaken up the boss because you have to beat him down fast. So you need somebody with that decreased defense. Anyway, those are the champions, right? The rares suck, which makes this a lot harder for sure. The epics are pretty solid and pretty varied, so you should be able to find a team just with that. And obviously, if you can have a good legendary, I would bring them in, although that's always going to be a little bit of a trick. Definitely, I would bring in Artak. If I wasn't doing this video, if I was just doing this for myself, 100%, I'd be bringing him into my team. Okay, so you can see the team that I'm bringing in here. Obviously, Zargala makes this a lot faster, which is part of the reason why I'm bringing her in here. But like I said, as long as you have somebody bringing a decreased defense, it should work. Honestly, Dux might be even a better choice. Bringing decreased attack as well as decreased defense can make the boss fight a lot easier, as well as the waves themselves. And if you do that, perhaps you don't need somebody like Vrask in there for the continual healing, or Tagore for the continuous healing, right? Maybe you can get away with just one of those healer type champions instead. But as it is, I'm bringing in both of them. I have Gaelic, I have Torture Helm, and I think this should be able to get us through it. So I'm just gonna click auto. I'm just gonna let it run. The waves, as you can see, aren't very difficult. So I'm just gonna let it run. We're gonna see how we get there. And next time you see this, we'll be at the boss. But in the meantime, why don't we go through and look at the champions that I'm bringing in, so you can see kind of how I put them together, what sets I'm using, that sort of thing. Okay, let's go through the champions that we have. We'll start off with Zargala. Obviously, not a ton of HP or defense. She's a damage dealer and a debuffer. That is how I have her built, with enough accuracy. I do try to keep her fast, right? So we have enough speed so she can take her turns over and over. She does hit hard, though. So I built her with some crit damage, 100% crit rate, absolutely. I have her in Helm Smasher. Honestly, probably for this stage, especially for bosses like this, War Master is going to be more useful, but this is going to help us get through the waves just that little bit easier. Now, I thought Torture Helm would be a fun little alternate choice to make here. 99% crit rate, we're almost there. Pretty darn good crit damage as well. He does have good multipliers on his skills, so I've always been tempted to use him. I built him in All Immortal because his A2 works off HP. His skills are kind of a mess. A1's attack and defense, A2 is HP, so it is kind of hard to build him right for damage, even with the multipliers. But yeah, not like a huge fan of him. Honestly, this is the one I would take out if I had a choice. Then the superstar of the show, an absolute revelation to me when it comes to Faction Wars, is Tagore. Really good for this. I was not expecting that. His ability to both, heal and to revive and give us increased speed as well. Really, really nice. I did put him in Guardian gear. I felt like this helps everybody survive, and I know this one can be tough for people to survive, as the boss can hit decently hard. Just a little, like 210 speed, 213 speed. Nothing crazy, but obviously faster is better. And then with enough HP for the shield and the healing to be more effective. Just, somebody like this, it's all about sustain and speed. Speaking of sustain and speed, we have Vrask. I pump the HP, get 100% crit rate. That's really all I have to worry about. Just try to give him as much speed as I can. Now, he's built for some of my Doom Tower work. I think I'm Bommel, so he's got a lot more resistance than probably is needed, and more speed than would be typical here. But you can see how effective he is as keeping everybody alive. With him, I probably don't even need Tagore, to be honest. And then very last is Gaelic. Look at that. I didn't even give him a chest plate. Wasn't even thinking. I was just like, oh, he's all set. I do have him in a stun set, though, but obviously there's some things I can do to improve this, right? Give him a chest piece of some sort. But the same ideas kind of apply here. For him, he's a damage dealer. I want damage, so it would have been an attack chest, as well as some accuracy to land his debuffs. Didn't have that, so we're going to kind of be stuck with what we've got here. But you can see, if I can bring him in, I can bring in pretty much anybody. All right, so as we get to the boss here, I still have it on auto, right? It was not hard to get through the waves. We're on auto. We're just running it through. I'm just going to let them kind of continue. But here's what I would say. If you're going to do this for your first time, target the ads, target the little guys, especially target this dude on the left here, this Templar guy, right? He does a big provoke that can kind of lock your team in. Knock him out first, then focus on the other one, and then focus on the boss. That's really your best approach. Now, here, you're going to see something really bad. So look at all the buffs we have on our champions here. This is why this guy's not a big deal, right? The leech, I don't care about that, especially not early on. I don't care if the boss is full health up until then, right? But here's the problem. We have all these buffs on our champions, and they're about to be stolen. You see it's on one turn, going to be used next. So one of the things I want to make sure to do is not use any buffs or debuffs, because that decreased defense is definitely getting transferred to us, and that's going to make us a little squish. So I want to do my best to avoid that as much as I possibly can. So hopefully we're going to run through all these speed buffs, but see, we didn't. Now the boss has increased speed and increased defense. That's not great for us. Definitely not a fan of that. So hopefully Torture Helm here can steal them. But at this point, now look, I can go ahead and try and put all the debuffs back on. Best I can. Decrease defense, weaken, all that stuff. We're going to see, okay, we stole half of the debuffs. That's good. Let's get that going. All right, we got the decreased defense now. We can do a little heal. Little increased speed for us. That's great, right? Now, I do have all my champions kind of fast, like in that 200 range, which is obviously good for me, but maybe not so, so easy to go ahead and do. But the advantage of that, obviously, is that we're fast enough to kind of take multiple turns here, even if the boss is going, does have the increased speed buff, or at least able to go then on top of that. But our whole goal here at this point is just try and get in as much damage as we can. So that's all we're doing, right? Literally, all we're doing is just trying to run in, get as much damage as we can. Got 2 turns. So if we're going to add some debuffs, now's kind of the time. Because once this turn ends, I'm probably don't want to, so they don't land on me. But that said, I was manualing there. Let's go back to auto. I'll just gonna let it run. I don't care really if the debuffs or not. We have enough healing and enough HP on these guys. Plus we still have the revive from Tagwar, that if somebody does go down, we can bring them back, but more than likely we're gonna be able to withstand it. I do have Tagwar in a Guardian set as well. That's helping give us a little bit of additional sustain, right? Which is really important. Obviously with Rask as well in there, we got plenty of healing once we do go low. And the passive Tagwar is actually a really big help too for surviving this stuff. So we're getting pretty close to the point where the boss is going to exchange that HP. Once you get to about here, right around 25%, that's where you need to start being careful. I think it's like under 30%. So there you go. You see the health swap. Now we have 12 turns to beat this guy down before he can do that health swap again. And that's our whole goal. Just as fast as possible, as effectively as possible. We want to beat him down and get him dead. So that's our goal here at this point. So I'm just gonna let this run. We'll see how hard it is to get there. And there we go. Wiped it out. Only took 6.5 minutes. Yeah, that's not long at all. It's generally one of the longer bosses because of the HP refill, basically. That's always going to be a problem with it. But, you know, no legendaries. We're able to get through it. We didn't even, I mean, our damage dealers aren't even crazy hard hitting champions. So there's definitely, you know, this can be easier or harder, depending on how you approach stuff. But you know, the main keywords are the same ones they always are. Build with enough sustain so you can survive those hits. Bring your speed, right? You're definitely going to want to try to aim for about that 200 speed mark. The faster, the better. And bring enough accuracy to land the debuffs that you need. But, you know, as long as your team's well balanced enough, you should be in good shape. And this is one of the few factions. You don't need a lot of CC because the waves aren't particularly tough. It does come in handy, though, with the minions. Like when you're trying to get the ads, get them down early enough, that definitely helps. So bring in things like stun sets, provokes, that kind of stuff is definitely helpful. Provoke, less helpful for the minions, but stun set, freeze, that kind of stuff. Always good, not always necessary. So anyway, that's the team. So hopefully this helps you guys when you're struggling with the orc faction. It's definitely doable. The hardest part is there's no rares that can help you. The legendaries are not as blatantly helpful. They're not as great for these kind of stages, but they can be really useful for you as you're trying to go through it. So it's not fast, but it works, and that's the key. So anyway, guys, hopefully this was helpful for you all. Appreciate you watching. Until next we meet, I'm the Deadwood Jedi.